A very, very, very good evening. Warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine. Welcome to probably the busiest show we have ever had, which is a precursor on Thursday to the even more busier show we have ever had in what is a busy week. But Dan Really Likes Wine on the back of a weekend that wasn't too quiet either. Huge thank you to all sorts of people in the wine industry that we got to hang out with as a Dan Really Likes Wine team last week. Bartony and our Sauvignon Blanc celebration on Thursday at of Friday's International Sauvignon Blanc Day with the teams from Bloemendaal and Iona and Klein Constantia and Stark Conde with us. We got to spend some time out at Plaisir and out at Hazendal. Absolutely lovely lunch at Potluck Club, more great food and great wine at Element House, and then a very special meal indeed yesterday at Beyond at Baton Bavachting. If you haven't been, Peter Tempelhof really is in fine form at the moment. Fane is something special, but the meal we had yesterday, a 5-course Mother's Day celebration with a bottle of 2003 Christine that it had held its head quite beautifully, made for a wonderful few days down in the Cape. But safely back up in Johannesburg, ahead of getting back down to the Cape. And the other team we visited on Thursday last week was the team at Boschendal, and that is a lead-in to Thursday this week. And at 12 o'clock, not at 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock we'll have our regular show, but at 12 o'clock on Thursday, a very special show coming to you from Boschendal. It is the launch of something very special, and it's going to be happening with some guests from around the world joining me on a unique broadcast at Boschendal. Lots of wine lovers, wine supporters, and a bottle of wine that's just a little different to anything Boschendal has ever produced before. I've tried it. I think it's lovely, but I'll let you find out what it is and cast your own opinion when we get to Thursday, 12 o'clock live on the usual platforms, as well as Boschendal's platforms on Thursday. So that is a busy Thursday ahead, a busy week ahead with all manner of cool things happening. We'll be still live at Boschendal on Thursday, but looking at a range of wine. Next week, we've got some more time down in the Cape. We're going to be doing a very special show on diversity and the WWF team, and that'll be coming to you from Franschhoek next Thursday. But tonight we are all over the place. A little later on in the show, we're talking to a fine wine expert about a collection of mostly French wine put together by somebody who had not just a fondness, but a great knowledge for an understanding of the world of wine, who has now got that lot up for auction with a team at Strauss. So Higgo Jacobs will be giving us a suggestion of what we should be purchasing. There is plenty of art, but forget all that art and focus on the important stuff, which is the wine. And that will be happening this weekend. So a chance to look at that later on in the show. We'll also be heading over to JD at Warwick. Brand new releases from Warwick. Also a competition that could see you win over 6,000 Rand worth of wine. That's happening with the team at Pick and Pay. So that is one to look out for, and that's up and running already. But we kick off the show with two people you might have seen on Dan Really Likes Wine before, but as people watching the show rather than people who have been guests on it. But I'm very glad that they are guests on them. One of them has a very sketchy wine history. She's been doing all sorts of dodgy things in the wine industry for years and years and years. And the other, well, he's kind of a wine smuggler, runs an operation out of Nelspruit, which is hardly the world's wine capital until you see his cellar, in which case you might review it, because I think he owns every single bottle of South African wine ever produced, ever. At least that's the impression I get. And they talked to me this evening about Riesling. You might think, why on earth are we talking about Riesling? Well, they've got something very cool on the horizon. And so joining me, it's a very warm welcome to kick off Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay for another week, Angela Lloyd and Daryl Balfour. Welcome to you both, and lovely to have you as guests on Dan Really Likes Wine. Good evening.
Lovely to be on, Dan. Thank you.
Evening, Dan. Good to be here.
Well, welcome to you both. Angela, let's kick off with you, because you are something of a celebrity in South African wine circles. You've been writing beautifully about wine, analysing wine, talking about wine, judging wine. I think fair to say, if you combine the wine writing with the glamour, probably the original Melu Lambert, and assessing the templates for South African wine, in as much as you can, because you've done so much in the wine industry. Give us the very brief history of Angela Lloyd in the world of wine.
Oh, gosh. Well, I started professionally at the end of 1983, and probably the best thing I've been known for is writing and judging for Platter, which I started in 1986 and have been doing ever since. So this is my 36th year I'll be starting. Basically, otherwise, I've just worked for anyone who'll pay me.
Well, I think you do yourself a great disservice because you've done so much in South African wine, and I've always thought it took me a long time to pluck up the courage to actually start talking to Angela, because she knows far more about wine than I ever will, and it's always been a pleasure with engaging you, as we're going to do with this Riesling in just a moment. But let's cross over to the heartbeat of Nelspruit, the Bordeaux of Mpumalanga, as it is so often referred to. Darryl, brief look at Angela's story there. What is your story, Darryl, and how on earth do you have every bottle of wine ever mentioned on the internet, which you just casually pull out a bottle of and happen to have sitting in that cellar of yours?
Yeah, Dan, it's not quite like that. Yeah, my wine journey started, well, over 40 years ago. If I told you exactly when, it would give away my age. But yeah, you know, I'm apprentice to Angela. I'm trying to get her to teach me how to get people to pay me to drink their wine.
Well, you're both extending your knowledge, and it's a vast pool of knowledge that you have in an event that is on the immediate horizon as you talk Riesling and talk us through a grape which we don't really, I think, know a huge amount in South Africa. We don't see that much of it. We kind of put it in a little German corner and think that that is largely where it stays. Angela, your thoughts on Riesling here in South Africa? Whether we do make it well, and if we do, why we're not making more of it?
Well, I think it's a question of supply and demand, Dan. I mean, we've got about 125 hectares. The majority of it is in Elgin, but it's spread right across the country. I mean, would you believe there's one in Outeniqua, there's one from Breer de Kloof. All these will be on our tasting at the end of next week. And there are about 35 producers. Some make more than one, different styles. Some make it 1 year and just once off. Some make it 1 year and then not again. I think it's always going to be niche, but it's very important that there's quality rather than quantity. And certainly, I think we've got quality. Both of the wines that Darryl and I have got are excellent.
And those wines are coming up in just a second. Darryl, you clearly have an interest in every single wine ever made, but I'm gathering there is a particular leaning towards Riesling and a desire to get people to understand it a little more as a grape. What is it about Riesling that draws you in and provides that attraction?
Well, Dan, you know, Riesling is probably the most underappreciated, underrated grapevine on the planet. And it's probably the third biggest white wine varietal. And yet, particularly here in South Africa, people have got this almost like an anything but Riesling attitude, which must have come about back in the days when producers were bottling Crucian and calling it Cape Riesling and Paarl Riesling. And it was a pretty bitter and watery, unpleasant wine. And last year, the year before, I started sort of accumulating some South African Rieslings. I think Jessica Sauerwein's Chai Riesling first really ignited my interest, and then talking to Angela, talking to other.
Oops.
Oh, I think we've got a frozen Darryl there for just a moment. He's got the only internet connection in Nelspruit, so we'll forgive him. And as we wait to get him back, which we will in a moment, a couple of people saying hello. Lisa Harlow, hello to you both from the UK. Grant Sauls, great lineup, Dan. Hi, Angela and Darryl from Grant, who is watching. Darryl, we'll just let you finish off there on those thoughts on Riesling and your championing of it.
Yeah, I just moved closer to my router. Yeah, you know, I just started accumulating a selection of Rieslings and talking to Angela and a few other people. Just decided, you know, very few people. We've got 40 wines we're tasting next week, at the end of next week, and only 4 of them are international. And I think a lot of people would be very surprised at how many Rieslings of quality are being produced in this country. So yeah, I came up with this idea of hosting a Riesling tasting down in Stellenbosch, and we've got people from all avenues joining us. We've got several producers. We've got people like Higgo and Roland doing the sales side of things. And I just think it's going to be quite an educational thing as well as a lot of fun.
I've got no doubt it will. And Ken Forrester is involved, so it promises to go downhill at some point quite rapidly. The two wines we have to try, one is from Spioenkop, made by a demented but wonderfully gifted Belgian, and the other is from the Jordan Empire, bringing together South Africa and England at the moment with a rather interesting experiment happening over in the UK. Let's go into that first one, which is the Spioenkop Riesling, and it's the one that I know is a particular favourite of yours, Daryl. Before we talk about it specifically, there are doubtless people who are watching, because we have a lot of guys who are still starting to learn a lot about wine, and Rieslings are great. Many people won't have had at all. Give us, before we look at this one specifically, just paint a broad picture what Riesling is and what, with good, great Riesling, the attraction will be.
Yeah, Dan, I think the attraction with Riesling is it can be anything. You get really dry variety versions. You get very sort of off dry. You get sweet, and you get very sweet. So I think it's a very multifaceted grape, and it's a great food wine. It's a great aperitif wine. It's a great dessert wine, and I actually like to open a dry Riesling alongside a Chardonnay, and just compare the facets of the two different wines.
Angela, in terms of, again, people who are still learning a bit about wine, what is Riesling the next step on from? If you've started drinking some of the more familiar varietals, where are you headed to? What takes you naturally into Riesling as you look to expand the wine that you're drinking?
Well, I would suggest Chenin Blanc, strangely enough, because Chenin, I think a lot of people were scared of trying because they weren't sure whether it was going to be dry or sweet. And in fact, Chenin has this wonderful acidity like Riesling does. So you can't go by residual sugar, and you can't just go by acidity. It's the actual experience of drinking it which will tell you whether it's dry or sweet. And more often than not, it tastes drier than the residual sugar might suggest. And it's very refreshing. I mean, the good acidity, like in the wine I'm drinking, this Jordan Real McCoy, it's so refreshing and tingling. I mean, it's a great wine to wake you up on a Sunday morning.
If there is anybody who is drinking wine on a Sunday morning, it is Angela Lloyd, or it is Daryl Balfour, probably the two of them over the phone together. The Spioenkop is mentioned here, Lisa Harlow. I also love Spioenkops, and it made my day that I tasted it before Daryl. Okay, there's a champion moment for Lisa. Greg saying Jessica Salvain has to be making one of the top efforts, but love Kuhn's wine, and of course the Jordan. Reginald Pecknoy up at Sabi Sands. Bonjour, Angela. Our own Jancis Robinson. Always a pleasure to see you. Darryl, I have no reason not to be seeing you soon. Keep the magic of the Cape rolling. Proud of you guys. And as Greg Sherwood says, we call it breakfast wine, Angela. Well, there's somebody who just never stops drinking wine, so I'm not sure Sherwood will be entirely believed. Daryl, let's plunge into that first wine. It is the Spioenkop. Give us, if you will, both an introduction to the story behind the wine, and then taste it for us, and let us know why it stands out for you.
Well, I mean, this is the 2017. I think you've got there, and I've got here, which is the wine we're serving next weekend. And according to Kuhn, it's the driest of the Spioenkops that he makes, the driest of the Rieslings. And it really is. It's very typical of the wines he makes. It's got a very waxy mouthfeel. It's got a lot of minerality on the nose. And some delicious fruity flavors coming through. Lemon, some quince, a bit of fennel coming in there. It's just a delicious wine, and as Angela was saying, it's a great breakfast wine. It's a wine that will go well as an aperitif, much as we're all drinking it now. But it's also Riesling is also a great food wine, and this wine I think would be tremendous with seafood, obviously, but also with a nice roast pork. So yeah, it's a versatile wine, and this wine is delicious. How's it going down?
And Darryl, we talk a little flippantly about having a breakfast wine, but for moments of celebration at a lovely brunch, we tend to think, well, we'll open a couple of bottles of bubbles, and that kind of limits us a bit. When you've got something like a Riesling, I often think a Chardonnay works quite nicely as well, especially when we've got loads of croissants. But Riesling does have a lot of qualities that if you can have a glass of champagne in the morning, you might as well have a glass of Riesling.
Well, yeah, most Rieslings tend to be lower in alcohol than most of the other white wines, particularly if you have a German Riesling. A lot of them are below 10%. So it's a very easy drinking wine for early morning, lunchtime. It's a refreshing wine, and some of them, particularly younger ones, almost have a bit of pétillance to them, which can be refreshing and almost bubbly.
Angela, tell us a little bit before we go into the Jordan about one of the characteristics of Riesling. So often you tend to pick up that little whiff of petrol or diesel or something that sits in that space. For people who may be drinking it for the first time, this tastes like 95 unleaded, or smells like it. I can't possibly drink it. And yet it is one of the really attractive characteristics that gives you a precursor of some of the intensity of flavor that is coming once you do actually drink the wine.
Yeah, it's something that develops with time, and aging is something that Riesling does brilliantly. I mean, I'm lucky enough to have a lot of German Rieslings in my cellar, and I try not to drink them until at least they're 10 years old and they're still as young as though they were made yesterday. But what's nice about our own Rieslings is not so much that kerosene petrol-y character, but the spice, the citrus, just the mouth-watering acidity, and when they age, they get that develops. The fruit gets a little bit seemingly riper, and the wine a little bit drier. It's all to do with age. It's not the actual wine itself which gets drier. It's the effects of age.
And those effects give us the wines that we have now, the 2017, just a little bit older, just double checking my Jordan is 2019, so it's had a little bit of time. If we try that 2019, you mentioned the German Rieslings. It tends to be the benchmark in our general perception of Riesling. But broadly speaking, it's a very open-ended question. But German Riesling versus South African Riesling, at the top end, how well do we compare?
Not. I mean, we make quality wines, but German Riesling is completely its own self, especially the Mosel. It's almost difficult to pin it to anywhere else. We've got Rieslings from Australia, New Zealand, Alsace, and Germany as the major wine producing areas of the world on this tasting. And so the Australian and New Zealand could compare, but Alsace and Germany are totally their own wines.
All right. Well, let's have a look at the South Africa nonetheless, because I am very much looking forward to it. The real McCoy. It is from Jordan. We've had the Spioenkop. We now move over to Stellenbosch. Are these Stellenbosch grapes, and what has the Jordan team done to make these good enough to be your selection, Angela?
Okay. They are from Jordan, the majority of them, but there's such demand for this wine that it's a wine of origin Western Cape, because Gary and Kathy buy in a little, I think, from Elgin and some from Hemelanada. But it is mainly from their own estate. But there's a wonderful, important story behind this, Dan, and Darryl touched on it. When in the mid-2000s, Gary and Paul Kluver and Lowell Juster, who then owned Klein Constantia, got together and started a Riesling association. The purpose of it was to sort out the labeling, because then we couldn't call Riesling Riesling. It had to be Weisse Riesling or Rhine Riesling, simply because of that interloper, Cape Riesling. And they lobbied the authorities and they called for comments, and we all piled in saying, no, Riesling should be just known as Riesling. And eventually the authorities agreed. So from 2010, everybody's been allowed, who makes Riesling, is allowed to call it Riesling, the real Riesling. Hence Gary and Kathy calling theirs the real McCoy, which is, I think, I mean, they have wonderful stories for all their wines, but that is superb. You can't see, but I've even got the T-shirt, the real McCoy T-shirt.
Which I believe you went swimming in at Jordan. Got it in one of the vats is the story, but I'm sure.
Oh, yes. Well, the good news is that that I heard this week from both Kuhn and from the Jordans is that they're reviving the Riesling Association. This whole story that Darryl and I have done with the Riesling Rising tasting, they've been so enthusiastic that they're reviving it. So I hope there will be renewed interest from the producer side as well.
Well, there's clearly interest here. We've loads of people watching. Victor Mofokeng from Kruger Charlati saying, I love Kuhn's wine. Nice to have you on the show, Victor, joining us from the Kruger. Johan Small-Smith pointing out that more often than not, quite low in alcohol. That has zero impact, Johan, on either Angela or Darryl. They just drink bottles. They do not affect them at all. They're kind of like Oblix and Magic Potion. It's just not going to work. Lisa Harlow, I love Riesling with spicy food. Well, that was alluded to by Darryl a little earlier. Josephine Couilleur, bonjour, Angela. So happy to see you again. Enjoying the interview.
Josephine.
Lovely to have you online. And Lisa Harlow, I didn't know that story about the real McCoy, another great Jordan story, and don't they have plenty of them? Well, I love the fact that Riesling is rising, and I think you two have been a collective catalyst therein. We've mentioned it a little already, but Darryl, let's go back to it. I think we have the poster of the event. This is coming up next weekend. It's the 21st and 22nd of May. Basically, the chance to sit down, try 40 different Rieslings in the company of Angela, Darryl, and a number of other luminaries, and spend time indulging in some excellent wine, but also learning a great deal. Darryl, is that the basic outline?
Yeah, Dan. I think it'll be a learning experience for some, but definitely for me. Just the gathering of so many winemakers, so many interested wine tasters. Unfortunately, the tastings both days are sold out. So any viewers who haven't booked, it's a bit late for them now, I think. But yeah, I'm looking forward to hearing people like Kuhn and Jessica who will be there. Leon Kutzier from the Fledge, Francois Harsbrook, guys like that are all going to be at the tasting, and I'm sure they'll voice some opinions. And I think it's just going to be a change of ideas. There are 18 people, 18 seats at the table, so it's going to be very informal and very educational. And Ken is laying on Riesling-inspired lunches on both days, so I think they'll end up being even more fun.
Gregory Hahn saying he's looking forward to this great Riesling tasting experience. Well, I think everybody there is. And there are going to be lots of people right now going, I didn't know about this. I've missed it. I haven't got my ticket. What am I going to do? Well, I suspect that there'll be another one fairly soon. It might be at the Greater Nelspruit Wine Tasting Centre, but it'll be somewhere. And I think Riesling we're going to see more and more of, which leads me, Angela, before I let you and Darryl get back to your second case of wine of the day, to ask you about the future of Riesling. It's great to hear that the association is coming back together. It's great to hear that there is that renewed interest. But at the moment, it is still very much a niche in the broader South African wine picture. Is there a brighter future for Riesling? Do you see more South African producers starting to give us not just more Riesling, but Riesling that is starting to edge a little closer to that German benchmark?
I sincerely hope so. And I think sommeliers have a big role to play here, because I don't know, Dan, you eat out quite a lot. How often do you see a Riesling on a wine list? And that's something that we need. I think that will encourage producers to make more and to make better wine, although, as I say, there really are some excellent examples, but it is quintessentially a food wine as well. I mean, I make quite a mean Cocoa Riesling, and I believe Darryl makes very good prawns. I haven't yet had them, but they would go very well with Riesling. So it's got a great diversity of compatibility with food. And I think that is the route to go in future. Restaurants, please, to have at least 2 or 3 Rieslings on their list, and get the sommeliers to introduce it to people who wouldn't normally go for Riesling.
It is not just so important for the restaurants to give us the opportunity, but also, as Angela says, to let us realize why Riesling and food make such natural companions. I remember my good friend David Higgs getting back from a trip to Germany a few years ago when we could still travel and boring everybody to death about Riesling that he'd had over there. So maybe there's somebody to do some meals with some Riesling for you, Angela and Darryl. But for now, I see Reginald Pecknoy just saying, tasted that 2017 Spioenkop Riesling at youthful stage with its opulent honey and toast, yet striking high acidity, keen to sample the same vintage. Well, that's a nice endorsement on which to say farewell to our opening guest, Darryl, Angela. I'm very sorry I'm not joining you for that next week, but I do hope that we'll be drinking some Riesling together soon, and I know I'll see you both at some wine events shortly. And I am coming to your cellar up in Nelspruit, Mr. Balfour, so look out for me there. But Angela, Darryl, thank you so much for being part of it, and thank you both for everything you do for the wine industry. It is greatly, greatly appreciated.
Yes, Dan, thank you.
There we go. Angela Lloyd and Daryl Balfour, they are drinking Riesling with Ken Forrester and a group of guests next Friday and Saturday. It is sold out, sadly, but I think it might be the first of many events, because interest in Riesling, as both Angela and Daryl suggest, is very much on the up. So too is interest in fine wine. And next Saturday, I'm going to be doing something rather special at the Cape Fine and Rare Wine Auction. And you're going to be able to hear from Nicholl, the director, who is on the show next Monday. And then we've got something very special planned for the following Saturday. And that fits in with a real trend for buying wine at auction, for investing in fine wine, for getting a feel of some of the older or more unique wine that South Africa has. But this weekend, there's also the chance to go a little further afield and go to a smaller up-and-coming wine-producing country called France, which is doing its best to compete with South Africa. And that auction is from a collector who's put up a remarkable selection. It is the latest Strauss auction, along with their artworks that make up another huge haul that's getting great interest, but I think the wine headlines it, and Higgo Jacobs can explain exactly why. Higgo, welcome back to the show. Lovely to have you on. You've got quite a big Sunday coming up. I've had a look at that catalogue. It is both enormously impressive and terribly intimidating, because, gee, there's a lot of great wine from some very special years up for sale.
It's an incredible collection of wine, certainly is. Dan, thanks for having me back. It's nice to chat to you again. I agree with what you're saying. I mean, it is certainly slightly intimidating as well, but it's just the good thing about this collection. Firstly, what I want to say is this is exactly part of the reason why we started this initiative, is to allow for private collections like this to find a home when they're coming up for sale, to really get the credit they deserve, and not just end up in some sort of bulk sale or some desperate sales. This is a serious collector that's been passionately and knowledgeably collecting a variety of good and more average vintages across the years, and in doing so, that then puts together some really rare and high price point wines, but also some good value across the lesser vintages. So it doesn't have to be intimidating, because some of the price points will be more accessible. And if you go and do a comparison with other currencies, perhaps, and what the wines are available in first world markets, you might find, I mean, it's hard to predict because it's an auction, as you know, this is buyer and seller, demand and supply, but you might find some bargains walking around, touch wood.
Yeah, that's complete rubbish, because I keep going onto your auctions looking for bargains and end up spending obscene amounts of money, but on very good wine, and very happily so, because the wine that is up for grabs is both unique and very alluring, and that is the case with this particular collection. And before I ask you about the collector, just the space we're moving into now, where it seems that more people are starting to appreciate wine beyond just buying it in the now for the now. They're buying wine either to keep for themselves for longer, or also starting to buy wine as commodity rather than as lifestyle product, something to hang on to and sell or invest in down the line. Are we seeing that shift? Are more people in South Africa starting to become wine collectors, not just for the wine that they drink, but for the wine that they hold on to as something to shift in years to come?
I think so, Dan. I mean, we want to be wary to encourage a culture of simply only looking at wine as a investment tool. I mean, it's a little bit of a cart before the horses situation. I mean, what we are building here is a fine wine market, and we're building an appreciation for finer wine. So I'm more interested in the first part of your statement there. What is really interesting is with a collection like this is, I mean, some of these vintages go quite a bit back, and we meticulously looked at the condition, we look at the ullage and so forth, and these wines weren't well stored. There's absolutely no way that we would go and put them on the resale market. So the important thing is to cultivate this seriousness around fine wines and the culture of collecting them and keeping them well, and certainly drinking them as well. I mean, this collector is a case in point. I never met him, but certainly from what I understand, he was a very generous person with his wines and really had a fine taste for the wines himself. So it wasn't a situation of just buying them with the view of eventually selling. I mean, he was collecting and drinking and keeping really interesting wines and keeping the company to appreciate them. So that's certainly for me, first and foremost, the culture that's happening. But without a doubt, the past couple of years, I think specifically pertaining to South African wine, we're seeing some great returns on keeping the top South African wines and the returns that they're bringing. This, of course, is 99% basically a French sale. This I don't think necessarily will show great returns on investment, but it's just getting the respect that the collection deserves from the estate for sale point of view. And it is a wonderful collection of wine, without a doubt. We're quite excited. It's probably one of the best sellers ever commissioned for a private collection sale on auction in South Africa, at least.
You've got some interest from one of the wine aristocrats in London, Greg Sherwood. I might have to drink one of Higgo's GS 1966s in the Hanford. Join in. Greg, you have my permission. That's absolutely fine. Higgo says he's quite comfortable with that. Go wild. We're good to go with that. Let's look at a quick selection then, if you will, Higgo. Yeah, I've had a look through, and it really is quite a selection. Pick four of them, if you will, from that selection that if you were buying, if money was no object, which it generally isn't if you're Higgo Jacobs, that you would be putting some money down for this weekend.
Then I wish that was the case. As an example of money being no object, I'm certainly looking forward to next week's Riesling lunch with Angela and Darryl. I mean, that looks like a splendid occasion. But yeah, just on the lots, I think the point that I made earlier, you can certainly splash here on some of the best wines in the world from some of the best vintages, and for that you're going to pay regardless of the platform that you're buying. And then there's going to be some sort of more interesting, perhaps not the top producers or perhaps not the top vintages there, where there's going to be a little bit more value. But if you don't mind, if we can start with the Bordeaux. I don't know if you have lots images up there, but for me the two lots to highlight with the Bordeaux, or perhaps three if I bring in the suite. But there's the cover image for the catalog is the 1982 Label Barton. There we go. So this wine, there's 4 bottles of it, and I spoke of value earlier, but value is obviously relative. But this is estimated between 4,000 and 5,000 rand per bottle. Now that might sound like a lot of money, but Label Barton, this is firstly one of the best vintages of the century is in 1982. If you that's the I mean, we don't bottle shop or do anything with our images. Those are the 4 individual bottles as are photographed there. So that's the actual ullage of the wine, which is almost, I mean, unbelievable. They are in ridiculously fine nick. And to get an 82, which is now almost 40 years old, of top vintage in great nick like this for 4,000 Rand perhaps a bottle. I don't know. Once again, of course, they can go higher, but that would be a wonderful lot to purchase. And I think the reason it's not that high is this is a second growth level bottle, so it doesn't perhaps have the prestige or the renown of some of the first growths. But it's certainly just as good. I mean, they've been going for such a long time with a real dedication to quality, and that wine would still be young. I've tasted some of their old vintages. I've never had the 82, but they keep remarkably well. And then to move on to something that might be a little bit less value, but would be an incredible wine to buy and to age for longer is the 2000 of the Lafite. So there's a Chateau Lafite 2000 in a wooden case, a 6-pack of that. This was fairly recently rated by Robert Parker, 98 points plus. So this wine, there's also a Margaux in a full case, but I think the Lafite is the standout of the unopened cases. I mean, this wine, both of them, but the Lafite will go for a long time. Still, the Margaux would be a little bit more elegant, a little bit lighter in style. The Lafite is a bulky number, and that just has a lot of legs and ageability. But the Lafite now, in comparison with the Label Barton, would probably be around 30,000 Rand a bottle, because this is first growth and it's also a top vintage, the 2000 vintage. And then just a quick note on the third Bordeaux, the Dichem 1962, perhaps more of an average vintage, but the Dichems are Teflon. I mean, these wines age superbly well. The bottle's in a very good condition as well. You can see on the color that it's still going to offer you quite a bit of youth. This will, of course, now have quite a bit of tertiary flavors, but just drinking a piece of history. It's a single bottle lot. So that would be a very interesting bottle to buy if you're interested in sweet wines, the old Bordeaux sweets, specifically Sauternes. This is, of course, a Noble Late from Semillon and Sauvignon Blanc. It's just, they retain their acidity. It would be a very complex and interesting sweet wine, this. And then there's a few interesting champagnes and some more sweets, but I think we would be sinful not to talk quickly about the Burgundies as well. And similarly there, again, we have a very nice spread of some super serious Burgundies, and then you can get a little bit more value again. So a producer I think that you've highlighted in a few lots is Armand Rousseau. Now, if you look at Burgundy, the wine that everybody know in Burgundy, and we've seen this with previous auctions that we've had, is Roland Conti, and these wines go for ridiculous prices. But if you ask serious Burgundy lovers around the world, many of them would similarly prefer Armand Rousseau to DRC, to Roland Conti. So these wines are, in terms of the history of Burgundy, they're as classic, they're as sought after. It's sort of the second tier of the top of the finest of Burgundy. So the Armand Rousseau is definitely something to look out for. On the high end of what's for sale from Armand Rousseau is there's, let me just look here, there's the 93 Chambertin. Now, if you look at, I mean, what Burgundy is kind of all about, that's, I mean, if you're a serious Burgundy lover, you have to have that image and that label in your cellar at some point, or just come across tasting it at some point. This is Chambertin, so it's the heart of Gevrey Chambertin, and most fine Burgundy lovers would agree that this is sort of the best Burgundy vineyards, not only in Burgundy but in the world. And the 93 is not necessarily a top vintage, but it's certainly not a bad vintage. But that wine, you know, it must go for a lot of money. It's so hard to find these wines in great condition. That's the key thing, I think, to say about Burgundy, is these wines are produced in really small quantities, really hard to come by, especially the older vintages in fine nick. So it's that's going to be a rare lot. But then also still from Armand Rousseau's vineyards like the Claude Laroche. I'm not saying they'd be cheap, but that would then constitute more value. And vintages like the 93 And the 91, I think you had highlighted there. Yeah, there's the Claude Laroche 91. That's also Amoroso. So hang on, my eyes deceive me. That's 93. Yeah. So the again, sort of a fairly average vintage, perhaps slightly above average. The wine's going to be fresh, still lots of life to it, but starting to exhibit these classic Burgundy age characters, a little bit of meatiness, forest floor, some earthy characteristics. And they're known for their elegance. So it's just going to be a wonderful lot. And I think this will be much lower on the price scale. It's still a Grand Cru, but it's not quite the Chambertin. And then just one final note on the Burgundies. There's some really smart whites there to look out for as well. There's some lovely Court of Charlemagne's in the white Burgundies from younger vintages that would be lovely purchases. Dan.
So there we go. Those are Higgo's 26 top 4 wines that he will be looking out for come the auction this weekend. Very quickly, Higgo, remind us if people want to get involved, come and have a look, get bidding, possibly get some of that wine. When is it? Where is it?
It's this Sunday. It's at 11 a.m. and it's the second of this year's of Strauss's virtual live sales. So this was introduced last year as part of the lockdown initiatives, where it's the auctioneers live is streamed on live online through the back of house platform of Invaluable, but you access the site through Strauss & Co. It's at 11 o'clock this Sunday. So if you go onto Strauss & Co, it would be the first thing that you see there. You click on the live auction. You can also register pre-auction bids. And for those interested and the listeners that are in Johannesburg can go and attend physically at the Houghton office of Strauss. The auctioneer would be there and auctioning off, and you can register and bid from there. But what we find, especially on a Sunday, it's really unintimidating. Register from home. You get a bid number. You can put in a proxy bid. You don't have to be physically present the whole time, and you can give us a maximum that you're willing to spend, and if it goes above that, then you just lose the bid. So it's real nice and simple. But get in touch. All the contact details of the wine department is on the Strauss & Co website, and we'll guide you through the process this Sunday.
There we go. Some great wine. It's a terrific collection. And as Higgo's showing you, it's a staggering selection. Reginald Peck, Higgo, you mentioned only 4 bottles under classification second growth. Mark my word, they're sold. Bordeaux's of 82 are rare in South Africa. Well, now you know, Reginald, where to get some. Higgo, best of luck this weekend. Looks like another terrific auction. Have fun with it. And I'm going to cancel my internet connection on Saturday night just to make sure you don't lure me in to any more crazy purchases.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to see you.
There we go. Higgo Jacobs overseeing the wine on another selection that Strauss have up this Sunday. You can get that online from 11 o'clock, run through the Strauss website. Right, one final guest for today, and it links in with a very cool competition happening at Pick and Pay. If you're a member of the Pick and Pay Wine Club, which of course you should be, the estate is Warwick, the prize is enormous, and the guest is the winemaker, who we say, not for the first time, a very good evening to JD. A warm welcome back to Dan Really Likes Wine. Lovely to see you.
How's it, Dan? Thank you. Nice to be back. Nice to see you.
How go things on Planet Warwick? Are you settled down post-harvest? Are you all looking good for the 2021 vintage?
Yeah, exactly. We've just come back. The cellar team took a bit of leave last week. We've managed to finish all the pressing, get everything done, and safely into bed. Started our first bottling today of the 2021 vintage Sauvignon Blancs. So yeah, all systems running. The industry is definitely in a little bit more of a back to normal routine. Not quite where we were 2 years ago, but by far a lot more happening than a year ago, than when we just came out of lockdown. So for that, we're very thankful. And lots of fun wines made. We had a challenging harvest. It was quite a late harvest, pretty cool growing season, and with quite a lot of rain throughout the ripening season. So it kept us on our toes. But ultimately, very good quality, and very happy with everything that we've got in the tank and in barrel at the moment.
It's good to hear upbeat words from our South African wine community. And that's not in isolation. Hearing a lot of guys starting to feel a bit more confident, a bit more positive. And that leads us nicely into the wine that we have and to a great competition, which we'll touch on in a second. As we start the wine, Greg Sherwood, again from London, we are smashing through the Pitch Black and the Blue Lady 2017s at the moment, both delicious. Indeed, they are. They're not the wines that we have today, though. We kick off with some Sauvignon Blanc, and that's not inappropriate. The Sauvignon Blanc Day celebrations, I think, are still tumbling into this particular week after Friday and indeed the back end of last week for most people. We have here, let me just grab it, the Professor Black Sauvignon Blanc, and we know the First Lady. We know the history of Norma Radcliffe and the celebration that you give her. Where does Professor Black come from? Sounds a bit like somebody at Warwick was playing Cluedo when you were looking for a name for a wine.
Almost like that. And we back in the 60s when Norma and her late husband Stan started Warwick, they did a bunch of different things on the farm, and they had quite a lot of peach orchards. And Professor Malcolm Black was a professor in pomology at the University of Stellenbosch, and he approached Stan and asked him if he could come and trial this new peach variety that they've selected, and that they were very keen on planting. It was early ripening peach, and ripened about 2 weeks earlier than normal, than the normal varieties in the Cape at the moment, and which would put South Africa in a very cool position in the rest of the world, allowing us to supply in a kind of a little dead zone. Unfortunately, what he didn't realize is that he'd moved the flowering of this peach tree straight into the southeaster, basically into the same time as when the vineyards would be flowering. And unfortunately, the wind just took its fair share of the flowers and then ultimately the crop. So he never really got to be a commercial success as a peach variety, as a peach farmer. So peach trees take quite a long time to come into production, about 7 to 8 years before they start bearing, and then ultimately another 2 or so years down the line to see if maybe it was just 1 season or 2 seasons. So this project dragged on well over a decade, and eventually they pulled the plug. Stan and the professor had become quite good friends. He felt quite sorry for him, and that this whole thing had been a failure. So he planted Sauvignon Blanc where those initial orchards were, and he named the actual vineyard Professor Black. And ever since then, there's been a Professor Black Sauvignon Blanc. And ultimately, since then, we've added on a little bit more vineyards to where the initial orchards were. So, and we've grown the range a little bit from there.
I love the story. I love so many of the stories of South African wine names. There's great thought and creativity and history that go into many of them. You've now got me thinking, right, am I going to be able to pick up any peach in this particular wine? It is the 2020 Sauvignon Blanc. As I drink it, introduce it to me, if you will, JD.
Yeah, well, Dan, exactly. I think I'll leave the peach up to you. There's always a bit of stone fruit that I pick up on Sauvignon Blanc, specifically from Stellenbosch. But this is very typical. It's got a lot of passion fruit. It's got some nettly grassiness to it, and then a lovely green fig character as well. It's quite fresh. It's quite rich, and it's got a nice texture. And the 2020 at the moment drinking beautifully, really coming into its own now. And yeah, we're very excited. Pick and Pay is just the last few months, so we're very excited to be sharing this with the Pick and Pay crowd.
I think it was fair to say from the response that we got from Thursday's show, both from the winemakers, but also from people who were watching the show, sending in comments, that although Sauvignon Blanc is still a little divisive, and there are those people for whom it's just not going to and never will be the grape, we are seeing both a breadth of style, but also an increase, broadly speaking, in the quality of Sauvignon Blanc that's getting a lot more people to not just understand it and enjoy it, but to see Sauvignon Blanc for the different opportunities that the grape provides in the hands of different winemakers and from different terroirs.
Exactly, and I think Sauvignon Blanc's success is ultimately its downfall as well. It's like that with anything. As soon as people see there's a commercial avenue into this style or variety, it gets planted in areas where it shouldn't be, and it gets made in bulk volumes because it is the #1 selling variety in the country. So everybody makes Sauvignon Blanc because there's an economic side to it, and it works, and you make some money. And unfortunately, that means that it ends up making some watery and thin wines. And that's not what the variety is about. And I think it's not quite as diverse as the Rieslings that we were chatting about earlier, but I think it shares that beautiful kind of complexity of Riesling, where you can really, it showcases its style, its site. It's the styles are really quite unique and interesting, and I think that's what South African Sauvignons are really cool and unique about. Is if you taste one from Stellenbosch, it's completely different to Durbanville or Darling or Constantia or Elgin, and they all show their regionality and site quite well. And I think that is ultimately what we do very, very well in the local Sauvignon market.
Does the same apply, though, to the world of Chardonnay? Well, let's find out with our second glass, which is the White Lady, and this is going back to the great Norma Radcliffe and the Chardonnay. That was it. I should probably have asked Mike himself this question. He was here for dinner the other night. What was Norma's favourite wine? Did she have a particular favourite?
As far as I know, it was Cabernet Sauvignon. That's always been her favourite. But I think ultimately with all of them crept into her heart quite deeply, especially Cabernet Franc Chardonnay as well. She did a lot for even Pinotage. She was the first to create a Cape blend. So she did a lot so much for the industry. I don't think she would have narrowed it down to one favourite. But yeah, the White Lady is a beautiful, beautiful wine. Quite a powerful Chardonnay. We are in Stellenbosch. We're not in the Hemel and Ardagh or Elgin or so henceforth it is a slightly warmer growing region, and we champion that. We champion the kind of complexity that gives us. So we don't aim for too ripe. I think the wine shows great balance at around a 13.5% alcohol, and then we ferment it in barrel, very classically in French oak barrels, 1/3 new, 1/3 second full, and the balance in third and fourth fulls. And that gives the wine great complexity, great texture, and great richness. But ultimately, it's got a little bit more backbone. It's got a little bit more oomph than some of the cooler climate Chardonnays have. And I think that again sets it apart and makes it unique. But still, not without freshness, not without that kind of salivating effect that you want to go back towards it and have another glass.
The conundrum with this sort of wine is always it does have that freshness, certainly, and it's got some beautiful fruit to it, but it also has a lot of potential to go further. Drinking now, drinking later. When is this optimum for you?
Well, we're currently just on the kind of last of the 2019. We'll release the 2020 a little bit later in the year. And I generally find that the wines need about 2 to 3 years in bottle to really start showing their beautiful kind of more complex aromas. And from there on, it really is personal preference. We opened a 2014 a little bit earlier during harvest, and it was sensational. Now that wine was won kind of everything. It was entered into Platter Wine of the Year, etc. And so that is a really, really special wine. But that wine is really in such a good space at the moment. It's still got that richness, but it's still got the acidity and the freshness. And it's almost like the wine has got a little bit of extra life in it now suddenly. So, but that depends on your personal preference and how you like, how much kind of that evolved characters do you enjoy in a wine. But I would say anywhere between 3 and 5 years is a kind of golden thread where you'll get enough of that primary fruit, but also some more kind of tertiary characters and complexity building into the wine.
So basically just buy 10 cases of every vintage and stagger them as the years unfold as your simple way to go. 1/3 wine to try today, and this one's quite important for a reason I shall reveal in a moment. It sticks with the Norma Radcliffe tribute, and it goes to that wine which, as you've said, probably was the favourite of Norma, and it's one which Warwick continues to get not just kudos for, but keep a very big support base, and that is the Cabernet Sauvignon. It's always going to be a likely winner given exactly where you make it, but you do put a particular polish to it. This is the 2018. In the noise of 15 and 17, where does the 18 vintage sit for Cabernet Sauvignon?
Yeah, Greg, 18 was a slightly more challenging vintage than 15 and 17, unfortunately. It was kind of really at that point showing the stress of the drought, so quite small and quite concentrated. So I think that for Cabernet Sauvignon is not necessarily a bad thing. Small vintage, like I said, in terms of numbers and yield, and very, very small berries. That's something we saw across all of the varieties during the real kind of rough drought years. And Cabernet specifically has a very, very small bunch and a very small berry to begin with. In a good year, they generally don't go much bigger than a garden pea. So you can imagine the tannin sits in the skin, the color sits in the skin. So it's a very, very kind of complex wine. They've got great texture, they've got great tannin. So we did have to work quite softly with the wines to not over extract and extract too much intensity into the wines, because they had a tendency of going a little bit bitter. But I think this wine shows that kind of generosity of the drier vintages. It shows the opulent fruit. It shows the kind of more upfront fruity characters and great grippy tannin. Obviously, this First Lady we make to be drinkable at a slightly younger age, so we don't work the grapes as hard. And it's just a wine built for every occasion. If you come home on a Monday night, it's perfect to open a glass and enjoy with dinner, like I'm doing.
It's as am I. It's also great for a weekend celebration. For a weekend celebration, you might want a little more, and that leads perfectly into a very special offer at Pick n Pay at the moment, and that is the Magnum offer of the First Lady that is now available. And so there we go, just 176 Rand for a Magnum, saving 44 Rand. That's like 92%, I think. So it's a great deal on that First Lady Cabernet Sauvignon. And not just a great deal, but it's also both in terms of, I think, just the gravitas, JD, of a Magnum, but also the practicality of aging and of bottling. The Magnum does just always seem to be the perfect bottle.
Exactly. Our CEO, Christiana, always says the Magnum is the perfect size of bottle for if you're drinking alone. So it's, but it is from a technical point of view, it's a great thing to keep wine. Just from a technical point of view, you've got double the volume of wine and the same amount of oxygen between the cork and the wine. So from a chemical point of view, you kind of have double the aging capacity in that wine. Not quite as simple as that, but that's kind of what it boils down to. And it's a great gift. And as you say, it's got a nice gravitas to it. You'd always turn a few heads when you walk into a braai with either a big steak or a big bottle of wine. So it's a winning recipe.
I'll grab both of those at Pick n Pay this week and you'll be done. And not only that, if you do buy this bottle or buy any other bottle of Warwick at the moment, JD's been very generous at the moment, together with his marketing assistant, Tom, and they have put together a cracking competition, 6,000 Rand, in fact, more than, over 6,000 Rand worth of Warwick wine for a wine club member. One of you out there will be in the running to win that. You just have to buy a bottle of Warwick wine up until the 30th of May, swipe your Smart Shopper card, and bang, you are in the draw. You're going to win anyway because you've got yourself a great bottle of wine, possibly more, but you will also be in the running for that 6,000 Rand prize, which is a terrific prize for some terrific wine, as illustrated by the First Lady Cab, by the Chardonnay, and by that Professor Black Sauvignon Blanc. JD, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate the time. Good luck crafting this newest vintage, and we'll look forward to more great wines coming out of Warwick and to having you back on the show again soon.
Thanks, Dan. Cheers. Thanks for having me.
There we go. From Warwick Wine Estate down in Stellenbosch, winemaker JD. He's got a great history, made wine in loads of different places, but now calling the shots and doing so magnificently down at Warwick. That Pick n Pay Wine Club that you need to be a member of to be in the running for that Warwick prize. Send your Smart Shopper number to 36775. And as well as winning that Warwick prize, if you do buy a bottle this month, also 3 times the Smart Shopper points, your chance to get very special deals on a number of wines each month. 10 of them see 20% off. Plus, there is the Magnum deal, as you see with that Warwick Magnum, plus a deal on a case. And just a great selection and a great opportunity to support South African wine and the South African wine industry. Pick n Pay committing to buying 25 million bottles of South African wine this year to try and get the industry back on its feet after the torrid 2021 that the world of wine endured. That is us for what has been a terrific evening. Huge thank you to Angela Lloyd and Daryl Balfour. They'll be tasting Riesling with Ken Forrester next weekend, and Riesling is rising, as they've said. Good luck to Higgo Jacobs and the team from Strauss as they prepare for their auction next weekend. And a big thank you to JD and Warwick. On Thursday, remember, we are at Boschendal, 12 o'clock. We're going live on our platforms and the Boschendal platforms. We're launching a very special bottle of Boschendal wine. It's a global launch from Boschendal, 12 o'clock on Thursday. Lots of special guests and some extremely special wine. Thanks for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy your South African wine. We'll see you on Thursday at Boschendal. Cheers. Goodbye.